Swan Lake is situated in the north end of Cache Valley, as is Red Rock, which is the dividing outlet of the once great Lake Bonneville. On the south end of the community is a body of water where the swans return year after year for several weeks, in the early spring and in the fall. Many tourists come to see the swans while they are here. Because of these swans, Andrew Quigley, while working for the railroad, named the settlement Swan Lake about the year 1865. It had been previously called 5 Acres by the early settlers who built their cabins in the Stockton area. With the Homestead Act of 1862 came many more settlers in the valley, and farming became the prominent occupation. A Mr. Stoll set up a small store in the heart of the promising town, east of the railroad, which he later sold to Hiram Hansen of Logan in 1886. This store burned down, and Thomas Donahue, a telegraph operator at Oxford Station, bought a salt house and set up a grocery store and post office. In 1909, Samuel Thomas purchased the store, and his brothers, Chauncey and Moroni, joined him in 1915. They enlarged the store and building. Besides the store, it served as a dance hall, an apartment house, barber shop, and a harness and saddle shop. This was the start of Thomas Mark as we know it today. It has been the center of the community and has been handed down from father to son, and Martel's son Kim and his wife Mary own it now, the third generation. The post office also is in the store. The first postmaster was Andrew Quigley, then Thomas Donahue, Chauncey Thomas, Martel Thomas, and now his son Kim Thomas is the present postmaster. What would the men of the community have done if they did not have Thomas Mark so they could gather around the potbelly stove in the early days, and now the radiator, to visit and discuss what is going on in Swan Lake and the world? It also came in handy for Justin Kay's birthday party. In the year 1911, even before electricity and the telephone came to Swan Lake, Procter & Gamble were ready to unveil their new product, Crisco. William Howard Taft was the President of the United States. In May, the Mexican Revolution started by Pancho Villa was in full force in Mexico. The Hotel Utah in Salt Lake City was being prepared for opening day. On May 28th, the first car race of the Indianapolis 500 would be run, and the winner would be traveling at a whopping 75 miles an hour. But on that same day in May of the year 1911, another historic event was about to happen. Swan Lake was to be made a ward of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Prior to this day, Swan Lake had been a branch of the Oxford Ward. Joseph W. Kay had acted as the presiding elder of this branch from 1901 to 1911, with William Gambles and Thomas E. Waddips as counselors. Then, at a ward conference held May 28, 1911, Stake President Joseph Geddes released them and presented the name of Louis James Petty, Jr. as bishop of the new Swan Lake Ward, with Joseph W. Kay as first counselor, and Orville E. Hendricks as second counselor, and William Gambles as ward clerk. It was reported that there were 449 present at this meeting, so it was probably held at Oxford. At a state conference held June 11, 1911, L.J. Petty Jr. was ordained a high priest and bishop and was set apart to preside over Swan Lake Ward by Apostle David O. McKay. Joseph F. Smith, grandson of the prophet Joseph Smith, was the prophet and president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints at this time. Our current prophet, President Thomas S. Monson, defines a pioneer as one who goes before, showing others the way to follow. Thus, Bishop Petty, along with his counselors, clerk, and ward members, were pioneering our new ward. The ward extended north to the Grant Ward and south to the Oxford Ward, east and west to the mountains. Swan Lake was part of the Oneida Stake when they were first organized, until August 15, 1915, when the Swan Lake Ward was transferred to the new Portneuf Stake. In 1977, Bishop Douglas Sorensen became stake president, set apart by Boyd K. Packer, and a few years later, Swan Lake became a member of the Aramo, Idaho Stake, as they are at this present time. The first meeting of the new Swan Lake Ward was held June 4, 1911, with 189 present. It was a fast and testimony meeting with Bishop Petty presiding, Councilors J.W. Kay and O.E. Hendricks present. The minutes of this meeting read as follows. Prayer by Thomas Waddups, continue by singing Do What Is Right. Sacrament administered by Elders Leo Beckstead and Chauncey Thomas. The infant child of Alvin P. Thomas and Pearl Hillman Thomas, born April 6, 1911, was blessed and given the name of Howard Grant Thomas by Bishop L.J. Petty. The infant child of I.R. Hillman, Jr. and Ruby Faye Cutler Hillman, born May 3, 1911, blessed and given the name of Ira King by J.W. Kay. Joseph W. Kay then spoke of the great benefits derived from records. Elder Thomas Waddups enlisted us to work together for the interest of our ward. Councilor O.E. Hendricks spoke of the good work that has been accomplished as a branch in Swan Lake, and said we are now in condition to greatly improve. Bishop L.J. Petty said he felt that we had as good a chance to have as good a ward here as any in the state, and felt like doing all he could do to make it so. Meeting closed by singing O Ye Mountains High, benediction by William Gambles. Apparently the first meetings of the ward were held in the schoolhouse that was located about a half-mile west of the railroad. The Relief Society president at this time was Nellie Gambles. She had been Relief Society president since 1906 and was retained in the new ward. Her counselors were Matilda Millard and Mary E. Kay, with Mary Thomas as secretary. The primary president was Perry Pauline Thomas, with Ruby Beckstead first counselor and Sarah Virginia Quigley second counselor. The young women president was Chella Petty, with Pearl Thomas and Blanche Matkin as counselors, and the secretary was Mabel Hillman. The young men president was Leo Beckstead, with Peter Sorensen as first counselor and Jesse Denny as second counselor. Belva Hadley was the first baby born after we became a ward. She was born October 6, 1911. Daisy Bell Martin was first to be baptized on July 27, 1911. First marriage was William C. Gambles and Fay Lily Henderson on November 15, 1911. First death or funeral was Olive Ann Henderson. On September 29, 1912, it is recorded that Bishop Petty said at sacrament meeting that they were about to send their first missionary from their new ward, and exhorted the people to assist him all they could. This new missionary was Chauncey Thomas, who served in the Northwest Mission. Life in Swan Lake at this time was hard work. There were wells to dig, wood to get and cut for the stoves, fields to be worked, planted and harvested by horses, not tractors, hay to be cut and hauled. Also, everyone had a garden and cows to milk. The women of this time also had it hard, not only raising large families, but they cooked on wood stoves, cooking everything from scratch, the gardening and then the canning of the produce, feeding the chickens, and many times helping their husbands in the fields. It was decided that Swan Lake needed a church house since they had been meeting in the schoolhouse, so around 1921 they started to build it with most of the lumber coming out of cottonwood. It was reported that Charlie Monson took on the task with much effort and was helped by many ward members. It was located just east of Thomas Mark and was dedicated May 13, 1928 by Apostle Stephen L. Richards. A new schoolhouse was also being built about the same time. It was south of the church, and made with yellow brick and had a full-size gym in it, where many games and dances were held. It held 8 grades and 2 rooms, with 3 teachers. Later, 2 years of high school were added, calling for a 4th teacher. The high school students were there until 1930, when they started going to Downey or the West Side to high school. In 1944, all the students were bused to either Downey or Aramo to attend school, and the schoolhouse in Swan Lake was closed for good. Also during the time of Bishop Petty, many Swan Lake traditions were started. Some of them were the ward reunion by the Old Folks Committee. They held a dance in the evening for many years in connection with this. Many of us remember these dances. In the summer, the men would relax from their work on Saturday afternoon and gather together and play baseball. In March of 1915, Bishop Petty called a meeting to discuss the need of a cemetery. Each family was assessed $4. Leo Beckstead and Alma Hadley served on the committee with the bishopric. Lester Henderson was the first sexton. Cleaning the cemetery before Memorial Day became a tradition. Everyone would show up with shovels and rakes to beautify the cemetery until it was made into a cemetery district in 1970, and a well was dug so grass could be planted. Today we are very proud of our cemetery. Around the 24th of July, Sunday school and sacrament meeting were often held at Heart Mountain, commemorating the pioneers' arrival to the Salt Lake Valley. The 24th of July parties are still being held in Swan Lake, this one included. Swan Lake Ward has held many celebrations, Christmas, Halloween, and many other parties. About the time the new Highway 91 was beginning to be constructed through Swan Lake in 1935, the first bishopric was to be replaced with a second one. L.J. Petty Jr. had served faithfully for 24 years, and William C. Gambles was called as bishop, with Peter Sorensen and William M. Thomas Jr. as counselors. They were set apart by Apostle Marvin J. Ballard. Leroy Petty was ward clerk. With the new highway came easier travel and a new service station and blacksmith repair shop. Ernest Hans Olson moved his repair service across the highway from Thomas Merck. He truly was the village blacksmith, helping the farmers and anyone else in the community. He became a good helper and friend to many in Swan Lake. In the middle of the Great Depression, under the direction of General Relief Society President Louise Y. Robison, the world-famous Relief Society Singing Mothers was organized. Every ward had their own singing group that practiced regularly, Swan Lake included. These groups sang for years in stake, regional, and general conferences. The ward had been in the original church house for over 50 years when it was decided a new one should be built, because the building should soon be condemned. DeMont Bell and Lynn Fackrell received the bid to build our new chapel. Each family was assessed $1,500 to help build this new church. This was a large amount for many, but we were blessed and able to meet our goal. It was decided to have a big dance in the old church house before it was torn down. The church was beautifully decorated, and some of the girls danced in a floor show. Also, a quartet consisting of Marcia Hadley, Carol Henderson, Brad Thomas, and Blair Henderson sang the theme song, "Memories Are Made of This," and we had a program celebrating the fond memories of our church house. The groundbreaking ceremonies of the new church were held on August 3, 1970. The last meeting in the old chapel was June 6, 1971. The ward had bid on the job to demolish the building. They received this bid for $2,360, and the ward members all turned out to tear down the old church house. They did it in 3 days, June 7th, 8th, and 9th, even though the old building did not want to go down easily. For the next 2 weeks, the ward met at Heart Mountain for sacrament meeting and Sunday school, while the new chapel was being finished. We met in the new church for the first time on June 27, 1971. An open house was held September 25, 1971, to allow all who wanted to see our new church. It stood as a monument to the faith and courage of the ward members, and everyone was very proud and grateful for it. The new church was dedicated December 9, 1973. Phil Gambles gave the opening prayer, Bishop Douglas Sorensen spoke, President Reed Kammack spoke, President Wayne Wheatley and President Alan Brady were in attendance. Brother Douglas Smith, our regional representative, spoke and gave the dedicatory prayer. Lynn Merrill gave the closing prayer. It was reported that it was a wonderful prayer and a very spiritual meeting. The Swan Lake Ward has had many good bishops and ward members through the years. After William C. Gambles was released in 1943 as bishop, then James Abbott was ordained a high priest and set apart as bishop of the Swan Lake Ward by Thomas E. McKay. Bishop Abbott's counselors were E. Lionel Merrill and Nathan Thomas, with Woodrow Sorensen as clerk. They were released February 1, 1948, and E. Lionel Merrill was put in as bishop with Nord K. Westover and Joseph W. Kay as counselors, with Woodrow Sorensen as clerk and George Q. Matkin as assistant clerk. In 1959, that bishopric was released, and Douglas Sorensen was ordained a high priest and set apart as bishop by L. Ray L. Christiansen. Reed K. Westover and Lynn Hyde Merrill were counselors, with Delbert Holden as ward clerk. On May 5, 1974, Phil R. Gambles was called to be bishop, with Brent Abbott and Kent Hadley as counselors. They were all set apart by Apostle Delbert L. Stapley. Lynn Merrill was the clerk, and Clark Millard as financial clerk. In 1980, Bishop Gambles was released, and Lynn H. Merrill was sustained, with Orville Brent Abbott and John Darwin Sorensen as counselors, with Kent Hadley as ward clerk and Terrell Sorensen as financial clerk. In 1986, Bishop Merrill was released, and John Darwin Sorensen was sustained as bishop, with Glenn Merrill and Alan Kay as counselors. Terrell Sorensen was ward clerk, with Brent Abbott as financial clerk. In 1989, Bishop Sorensen was released, and R. Kent Hadley was sustained as bishop, with Glenn Merrill and Mont Henderson as counselors, Alan Kay as clerk, and Brent Abbott as financial clerk. Then in 1994, Lynn H. Merrill went in as bishop for the second time, with counselors Kim Thomas and John Bundy, with Ted Gambles as clerk and Brent Abbott as financial clerk. Bishop Merrill was promised, since it was his second time around, that he would not have to serve as long as usual, and in 1997, Brent Abbott became bishop, with Brad Gambles and Alan Kay as counselors. Ted Gambles was clerk, and Tom Adams was financial clerk. In 2004, Brad Gambles became bishop with Glenn Merrill and Robert Hayes as counselors. Tim Layton was ward clerk, with Alan Kay as financial clerk. Then in January of this year, 2011, 100 years after its inception, Swan Lake got a new bishopric. Alan Kay was sustained as bishop, with Kim White and David Bozen as counselors, Darwin Sorensen as ward clerk, and Chris Sorensen as financial clerk. As people moved in and out of the ward and in and out of callings, there were many called to serve as counselors and clerks under these bishops. We have had many missionaries leave from our ward, Chauncey Thomas as the first one, and Corey Kay the last to leave, for a total of 80 since the ward's inception. Since Elder Matt Henderson recently returned, only Elder Corey Kay and Elder Scott Merrill are presently serving missions from Swan Lake. Over the years, our ward has experienced good times and bad. Many of our young men have served in the armed forces for our country, many seeing combat action. There were a total of 17 who served in World War I. 46 were called during World War II. Many were injured, and Gene Henderson, son of Merle and Marie Henderson, was killed at Iwo Jima. 2 of them were prisoners of war, Thomas Hadley and Forrest Beckstead, one in Japan and one in Germany. We give our local servicemen a big thank you for their service. We have several who are serving now. We recognize Belva Hadley, the first historian of Swan Lake, for much of the information in this program. Also, Faye Merrill for her journals, and Julia and Glenn Merrill for gleaning history of our ward out of her journals. We also would like to give special recognition to Brent and Vicki Abbott in their undaunting compilation of the history and facts they have gathered for this centennial. We appreciate all they have done and are still doing. We should be so thankful for the heritage we have been given from the pioneers of our ward and those that followed after them. We show them honor by recognizing their efforts and dedication. Their testimonies, their industry, their faithfulness, and their examples are the greatest heritage this ward has been given. Our present ward is an outgrowth of this heritage, and we thank our progenitors and our Savior for our present-day ward. We would like to end with a quote from Belva. She said, "Swan Lake is my favorite town, quiet, peaceful, and law-abiding, and a God-fearing, loving people encircle the confines of the community."